It was a cold evening on a lonely highway in Ohio, where a young, paralyzed girl sat helpless in her wheelchair, watching cars pass by without a single one stopping. Just when she began to lose hope, an old pickup truck slowed down, and a humble mechanic stepped out. What happened next would change both their lives forever. A story of compassion, courage, and the power of one kind heart. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get started. The evening air was heavy, with the quiet hum of distant traffic, and the faint orange glow of streetlights painted long shadows across the deserted Ohio road. Emily sat still in her wheelchair, staring at the fading horizon. Her hands were trembling, clutching her backpack as though it held the last piece of her courage. The wheelchair's battery had died almost an hour ago, and her phone had already gone dark. She could feel the cold creeping up her legs. But worse than that was the silence, the kind of silence that makes you feel invisible to the world. Cars rushed by, one after another, headlights blinding her eyes for a second before disappearing into the night. She could see faces inside those moving vehicles, silhouettes of people laughing, talking, living their lives, while she sat stranded on the side of the road. Every time she heard an engine, she lifted her hand slightly, hoping someone would stop. But no one ever did. The feeling of being left behind sank deeper into her chest with each passing minute, and her hope flickered like a dying flame. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, quiet and uncaring. Emily let out a shaky sigh, her breath forming a faint cloud in the cool air. She whispered to herself, maybe I'll just wait a little longer. But inside, she knew she was running out of strength. She had been on her way home from her evening class, determined to prove that her wheelchair didn't define her limits. Now, she wasn't sure if she would even make it home before midnight. The loneliness was louder than the sound of the wind. Her eyes wandered to the distant lights of a small diner across the street. It felt close enough to see, but too far to reach. Her arms were weak from pushing earlier, and the weight of helplessness pressed on her chest. She thought about her mother, how worried she'd be, and guilt filled her heart. She blinked away tears, whispering, "It's okay, Mom, I'll figure it out." But even her own voice sounded small, almost lost in the darkness. A gust of wind brushed against her face, carrying the faint smell of oil and gasoline. It reminded her of her late father's old garage, the place she used to watch him work before the accident that took both his life and her ability to walk. For a moment, she closed her eyes, trying to hold on to that memory. It felt comforting yet painful. The ache in her chest grew stronger, and she lowered her head, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. Then, through the stillness, came the distant rumble of an old pickup truck. Emily looked up, her heart skipping a beat. The headlights approached slowly, not speeding like the others. The sound grew louder, deeper, the kind that carried warmth instead of cold indifference. The truck slowed near her, its brakes letting out a soft squeak. For a brief moment, Emily thought it would just pass like the rest, but then it stopped. The engine turned off, and the silence that followed felt different, alive, hopeful. The driver's door opened with a metallic creak. A man stepped out, wearing a faded grey workshirt and grease-stained jeans. He looked around, then spotted her sitting by the roadside. Without hesitation, he walked toward her, his boots crunching lightly on the gravel. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted toward him nervously, unsure whether to trust a stranger this late at night. "Hey," the man said gently, his voice calm and genuine. "Looks like you could use a hand." Emily blinked, speechless for a moment. "My chair." "It stopped working," she managed to whisper. He nodded, crouching down beside her wheelchair. The glow of his truck's headlights illuminated his face, young, tired, but kind. "I'm Jake," he said softly. "I'm a mechanic just down the road. Let's see what's going on here." His tone wasn't pitying. It was steady, reassuring. Emily watched as Jake examined the base of her wheelchair, checking the battery connectors and wheels. His hands moved quickly but carefully, like someone used to fixing what others gave up on. "You've been here long?" he asked quietly. "A while," she said, her voice trembling. No one stopped. Jake looked up at her for a moment. His eyes filled with something unspoken, a mix of sadness and understanding. "Well," he said with a small smile, "someone finally did." And in that instant, something shifted. The cold emptiness of the night began to fade. As he stood up, stretching his back, Jake walked to his truck and grabbed a toolbox. "Let's get you moving again," he said, kneeling beside her once more. Emily couldn't take her eyes off him, not because he was fixing her wheelchair, but because he cared enough to try. The metallic clink of tools echoed softly in the night air, and the steady hum of his focus made her feel safe for the first time in hours. The world had ignored her all evening, but this one stranger had seen her, truly seen her, and that made all the difference. Jake tightened the last bolt beneath the wheelchair and wiped his hands on his jeans. The soft sound of tools clinking echoed through the quiet night. Emily watched him carefully, her heart fluttering with a strange mix of relief and gratitude. "You really know what you're doing," she said softly. He smiled, glancing up. "Well, fixing broken things is kind of my job." His voice was low and comforting, the kind that made her feel safe. She had spent so long believing no one would care, yet this stranger seemed determined to prove her wrong. He adjusted a few loose wires, testing the wheels before pressing a small switch near the frame. The faint hum of life returned to the wheelchair, and Emily gasped as it moved slightly forward. "It's working," she said, her eyes lighting up. Jake grinned. "Not bad for roadside surgery, huh?" She laughed, a sound that surprised even her. Soft, genuine, the kind of laugh she hadn't felt in months. For a few seconds, the darkness didn't feel so heavy anymore. The night had found warmth. "Where do you live?" Jake asked while packing his tools. Emily pointed down the long road toward a cluster of dim streetlights. "A few miles that way, near Oak Ridge Apartments," she replied. Jake nodded, thinking for a moment. "That's too far to go alone at this hour," he said. "Why don't I drive you home?" Emily hesitated, glancing at her chair. "It doesn't fit in trucks easily," she said nervously. Jake smiled. "We'll make it work." Mechanics are good at improvising. There was something in his tone, simple kindness that carried no agenda. He carefully loaded her wheelchair into the back of his pickup, making sure it was secure. Then he helped her into the passenger seat, moving with such gentleness it made her heart ache. "You always help strangers like this?" she asked as he started the truck. Jake chuckled softly. "Not always," he said. "But sometimes the world gives you a chance to do something that matters, and you shouldn't waste it." His words stayed with her as the truck rolled down the quiet road, headlights cutting through the misty darkness. They drove mostly in silence, the sound of the engine humming softly between them. Emily glanced at Jake from the corner of her eye. The faint stubble on his jaw, the grease stains on his shirt, the quiet strength in his posture. He wasn't like anyone she'd met before. There was no pity in his gaze, no awkwardness around her wheelchair, just respect. "You must love what you do," she finally said. Jake smiled faintly. "I fix cars, but honestly, I like fixing people's faith more. Machines are easy, hearts take work." When they reached her apartment building, Jake helped her out of the truck and placed the wheelchair beside her. The streetlight above flickered softly, casting a golden hue on them both. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You didn't have to stop." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Yeah, I did." There was something powerful in his tone. Simple, sincere, unshakable. For a brief moment their eyes met, and something wordless passed between them, a promise neither of them fully understood yet. As Jake turned to leave, Emily felt a sudden ache in her chest. "Wait," she said. He stopped and looked back. "Can I come by your garage sometime? I'd like to thank you properly." Jake smiled, scratching the back of his neck. "Sure," he said. "I'm usually around during the day. Just look for the red sign that says Ethan's Auto Repairs." She smiled, the first real smile in a long time. "I will." The night didn't seem so lonely anymore. It felt like the start of something she couldn't quite name. Days passed, but Emily couldn't stop thinking about that night. Every sound of a truck engine made her glance out the window, hoping she'd see Jake again. Finally, one afternoon, she wheeled herself to his small garage at the edge of town. The place smelled like oil and rain, and the sound of tools echoed inside. Jake looked up, surprised but happy. "You made it," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Told you I would," she replied with a soft smile. There was warmth in her eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. Jake showed her around the workshop, the old cars, the scattered blueprints, and the tiny coffee machine in the corner. "Not much, but it's home," he said with a laugh. Emily looked around, fascinated. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It feels alive." She watched him work for a while, the way he handled each tool like an artist with a brush. "You're really talented," she said. Jake shrugged modestly. "Just a lot of late nights and broken engines." Then he paused, looking at her. "But you've got strength most people never find." That afternoon stretched into evening, and by the time Emily left, it felt like the start of something far greater than gratitude. Jake had given her more than just help. He'd given her hope. She wheeled away under the golden glow of sunset, the sound of his tools fading softly behind her. For the first time in years, she felt like her life might change. Maybe the world wasn't so cold after all. Maybe, just maybe, kindness still existed. And she had finally found it in the heart of a 25-year-old mechanic who decided to stop. The next few weeks changed everything. Emily began visiting Jake's garage almost every afternoon. She would roll in just as the sun dipped low, filling the workshop with amber light. Jake would look up from his tools with a small smile and say, "You're right on time." They talked for hours, about cars, about dreams, about life before and after the accident. Emily found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done freely in a long time. Jake's quiet warmth made her feel like she belonged, not as someone broken, but as someone still whole. Jake noticed how her eyes lit up whenever she talked about freedom. Not in words, but in movement. "Sometimes I just dream about standing again," she said once, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not even walking. Just standing." Jake leaned against the workbench, thoughtful. "Maybe that's not just a dream," he said. She frowned slightly. "You can't be serious," but he was. Something in his eyes told her he meant it, not as a mechanic chasing an idea, but as a man who refused to accept limits. That night, long after Emily had gone home, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat in the quiet of his workshop, surrounded by blueprints, tools, and the faint hum of an old radio. He began sketching, rough designs of metal supports, flexible joints, and small electric servos. His hands moved quickly, guided more by emotion than logic. The thought of giving Emily that moment, to stand, to smile without pain, drove him deeper into his work. He didn't see this as charity. To him it was purpose, the kind that defines a lifetime. Days turned into nights as Jake worked tirelessly. He salvaged spare parts from junkyards, reshaped metal with his bare hands, and tested old circuits from broken scooters. The workshop became a mess of wires and notes, yet within that chaos was something beautiful, a dream taking shape. When Emily showed up one afternoon, she found him asleep at his desk, a sketch of a robotic brace beside his hand. She touched the edge of the paper gently. "You're really doing this for me?" she whispered. Jake stirred and smiled sleepily. "No, Emily, I'm doing it with you." From that day they worked together. Emily became his assistant, handing him tools, taking notes, and offering ideas he hadn't considered. "What if the support bends here?" she asked once, pointing at the design. "That might make it easier to move." Jake grinned. "You think like an engineer," she smiled proudly. Each passing day brought them closer, not just in friendship, but in faith. In that small, oil-stained workshop, hope hummed louder than the machines. It wasn't just metal and bolts anymore. It was belief, rebuilding both of their hearts. One evening, after weeks of effort, Jake finally completed the prototype. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. Emily nodded, eyes wide with anticipation. Jake carefully adjusted the brace around her legs and secured the straps. The motors buzzed faintly, and she gripped the workbench for support. "Okay now." Slowly, Jake said softly. Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt the world shift beneath her, not as weight pressing down, but as strength rising within. Her legs shook violently at first. The metal braces whirred, balancing her unsteady frame. Jake's hand hovered near her shoulder, ready to catch her if she fell. "You're doing it, Emily," he whispered. Tears filled her eyes as she straightened an inch, then another, until she was fully upright. The sunlight streamed through the dusty window, painting her in gold. She looked down, disbelieving. "Jake!" "I'm standing," she breathed. His own eyes glistened. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You are." The world seemed to pause, two souls bound by a moment too pure for words. Emily's laughter filled the garage, echoing through the open doors. She took her first small, trembling step forward, then another. Jake followed beside her, steadying her when she wavered. It wasn't perfect, but it was everything. Her tears mixed with joy as she whispered, "I thought I'd never feel this again." Jake shook his head, smiling. "Never stop believing, okay? Even broken things can work beautifully again." They stood there, surrounded by sunlight and machine parts, both realizing that this, not just walking, was what healing looked like. News of Emily's recovery spread quickly around town. Neighbors began stopping by the garage, curious about the miracle mechanic. Some came to see the brace. Others just wanted to thank him. Jake didn't seek fame. He only smiled politely and said, "It was her courage, not my hands." Emily insisted otherwise. "You gave me my life back," she told him one evening. "No," Jake said gently. "I just reminded you that it was never gone." Their bond had deepened beyond gratitude, something quiet, unspoken but filled with light. Local reporters soon arrived, eager to capture the story that inspired everyone. Cameras flashed as Emily stood beside Jake outside the garage, still using her braces but glowing with pride. A banner hung above them reading, "Hope Mechanics." Jake looked slightly embarrassed by all the attention, but Emily just laughed. "You earned this," she said. He shrugged. "We both did." As the crowd applauded, Jake realized this wasn't just about one act of kindness. It was proof that compassion, even from a stranger, could rebuild a soul piece by piece. That night, after everyone had gone, Emily sat beside Jake on the workshop floor, her legs resting in the brace. "Do you ever regret stopping that night?" she asked softly. Jake looked at her, the faint smile never leaving his face. "Not for a second," he replied. "Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have found my reason." She blushed slightly, her heart warm. The workshop lights flickered, and the air buzzed with quiet peace. They didn't need more words. The silence between them said everything. Two broken paths had finally found one direction. Weeks later, as autumn leaves fell outside the garage, Emily visited again, this time walking on her own, without support. Jake froze, his eyes wide in disbelief. She smiled, tears glimmering. "I did it," she whispered. "You did," he said, voice trembling. They hugged, long, fierce, full of everything words could never say. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was something far better, real. Kindness had done what miracles often can't. It healed two hearts by teaching them that even on the loneliest roads, one act of love can change everything. As the sun set behind the little garage, Emily stood proudly on her new legs, smiling brighter than ever. What began as a moment of despair had turned into a story of hope, faith, and kindness. Jake never saw himself as a hero, but for Emily, he was the man who gave her back her strength. Sometimes, one small act of compassion can change two lives forever. Thank you for watching KindSoul Stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from.